Good morning. Thanks for joining me. It's a wild and windy morning, so I thought I'd make a video. And we're returning to the theme of I lived in Doggy. Today's topic is working in the 60s. That's the 1960s. Born in 1950, my dad was a painter and decorator, ex-RAF personnel. My mother was a housewife, keeping everything together, and she was ex-army. She'd been a batwoman in the war and enjoyed it. I believe at one point she was stationed at Stokesley, not far from here. So that was my parents. My sibling, born in 1947, my brother Barry, 3 years older than me, born in 1950. My brother Barry had a very hilly school time, and so when he come to work, it was mainly in shops, to which he had an aptitude. When he worked at new houses in Middlesbrough, he actually modelled beetle suits and beetle jackets. I don't know whether you can remember them. They had a neck not dissimilar to this t-shirt. So he must have been a character if he ended up modelling for them. Well, the jobs he had was as a, now let's get this term right, I think he was a trimmer in a local clothes factory, making suits, 1, 2, 3-piece suits. And it was a job I got to see close up, because during one period of my unemployment as a contract mechie fitter, he got me a job. I'll just remember the name of the factory. John Collier's, Saltwells Road, Middlesbrough. So Barry got me a job, and once they taught you to draw around a card, which was a template, and then cut it out, it was passed on to another group of people to sew together. If you got it right, great. If you got it right fast, you made extra bonus. If you got it right very fast, you had an easy life. If you got it wrong, it was called a kill. And you invariably had to do it again. Now, there was men and women in the factory, and the women were putting the suits together, and they were the ones that would call kill. And they didn't mince words, so shouting across the factory floor that you'd had a kill wasn't very good for your ego or your bonus. Getting back to my brother at the factory, he was a very skilled trimmer, very fast, using big shears, cutting sometimes multiple layers of cloth. Now, his work was distinct from a cutter who used a sort of a bandsaw to cut multiple pieces of material. There was lots of processes. Getting back to the trimming. Brother Barry, very fast, easily made bonus, and he had some workmates that were equally as fast. And I must admit, they helped me achieve bonus by putting some of their work in my bin, as it was called. And your bin was where your work was counted up and your bonus assessed. So they made my life easy. I was only at the factory a short time. I progressed rapidly, but I was never as fast as the fast lads, and my brother was one of the fastest in the factory and a trusted employee. Just an aside, certain colour suits were easier to make bonus on. There you go. Now I don't know whether it's brainwashing, indoctrination or what, but I can still remember some of the L149 linings. Imagine that. All those years ago, and I can remember paisley linings going in three-piece suits or on waistcoat back panels. Yeah, L149. What a waste of space that is. So that was my brother, working in shops, being a model, and then working in a factory. My work, I was always mechanically inclined. Little did I know I was following in my grandfather's footsteps. He'd been a mechanical fitter at Smith Docks during the Second World War. It was one of the reserved occupations. And I come to find out when I joined Smith Docks that he was well respected. Pop Pollard, he went by. He never relinquished a pipe, it was always in his mouth. And he was renowned for scraping brass metal bearings between his knees in the very bowels of a ship. Now, bear in mind, I didn't know he'd trod this route. I didn't know my father had once been a turner at Smith Docks. I only knew my father as a painter and decorator and skilled craftsman that was able to refurbish pubs as oldie worldy pubs. So my work, when I eventually arrived at the gates of Smith Docks, with no qualifications, I'd left Stainsby with nothing. I had no intention of staying there a moment longer. I arrived at Smith Docks, stood at the gates, and didn't know what I wanted to be. I knew roughly there were various trades: fitter and electrician were two that sprung to mind. I went into the shipyard, arranged an interview, and returned to be met by Mr. Peter Brown, personnel officer. He interviewed me. Something about me must have impressed him. He took me on as his personal office boy while we waited for the apprenticeships to start later that year in September. So I got to work for Peter Brown. I had a push bike, not unlike a butcher's bike, with room for documents in the basket on the front. And I would pedal all over the shipyard, getting to know people and places. There were other office boys in Smith Docks, and they would congregate in this office block in the heart of Smith Docks. I would come across them, and I guess I was the oddball. They were all together and I was separate. Little did I know I had the plum job. Over the months, I got to know all the departments, most of the senior people working in the departments, and most of their office staff. Lots of papers would be shuttled about throughout the dock. Things that stood out for me in Smith Docks South Bank on the River Tees were things like the mould loft, where every part of a ship was moulded in wood so that it could be assembled when trying to, well, who knows what, maybe visualise what a full-size ship would look like when being built. There were craftsmen making these models and moulds, and it never failed to amaze me. So that was the mould loft. Another department was the machine shop, full of people on lathes and other machines, and there was a tool room within the machine shop where the most skilled part of the work was done. One of the things that stayed with me over the years of working in Smith Docks was to see a prop shaft being lowered into a ship's propeller vertically using a very large crane overhead. Tapers were involved, a taper on the shaft, a taper on the propeller, and of course a large key for location, so that once the tapers were joined, the key would help with the driving force. And as luck would have it, some tapers worked and some didn't. Of course it was a nightmare if it was lowered in, that taper that is, and then it didn't go all the way. But that was life, I suppose. So there was heavy engineering, medium engineering, and very skilled light engineering going on in Smith Dock's machine shop. One of my great pals, the late Alan Stewart, RIP, who became one of the famous road racers in Teesside, winning ACU 250 and 350 star with his Yamahas, sponsored in the latter days by Russ Armstrong Motorcycles of Middlesbrough. Alan worked in the tool room, and I would pass by and meet him as an apprentice, but I couldn't hang around long because I had work to do. So that was the machine shop. There was the dry docks. If you've never seen a dry dock, imagine a hole in the ground with gates on one end. The gates would be opened, water would flow in, a ship would move into the dry dock, the gates would be shut and all the water pumped out, and the ship would sink to the bottom of the dry dock and be supported on oak beams throughout its length and a couple diagonally just to prevent it toppling over. Once the ship was in a dry dock, propellers could be renewed, grids and anodes could be removed and replaced. Anodes are the great big 28-pound lead weights that are bolted or welded along the ship. And these lead weights are called sacrificial anodes. They would stop the rest of the ship corroding as much. The grids, they were grills in the base of the ship. When somebody flushed water, it would go out into the sea through the grid. Of course there was valves to stop water ingress. These grids used to be absolutely coated in barnacles. So when we took them off as mechie fitters in the dry dock, they would weigh considerably and be very sharp. Oh, did I mention we worked off sometimes single planks way up in the air. Imagine the bounce of a single plank with multiple people on it. The greatest challenge in a dock bottom that I ever faced was working on the propeller gang, wielding big hammers, 40-pound Monday hammers, not wielded by myself as an apprentice, but by mechie fitters in the squad and labourers. So that's how things were tightened and untightened in a dock bottom. Ships could be brought into a dry dock after being launched. So there was very little in the ship, and it was built at that point and then floated out onto sea trials. Another department were the dock fitters, where you worked on ready-built ships, and that's where I came across my grandfather's legacy of hard work and skill. I kept my name quiet for quite a while as a young apprentice, but then somebody tumbled that I was related to Pop Pollard, and it turned out he was a cracking craftsman. So, cheers, Grandad, you did me proud. By the way, he always said Hitler was a good man, he kept him in work. Another department, the outside fitters. In this department, all sorts went on, including the building of ships. Jumping back to our apprenticeship, in the shipyard, you did a week on each trade. That included mechie fitting, electrician, pipe fitters, caulkers, coppersmiths, welders, burners. You tried all of these jobs for an appreciation, and then you decided which one you wanted to go for. I picked mechie fitter, and little did I know electricians or sparkies would go around for the rest of their life with 2 screwdrivers in the top pocket, making a mint, and I was due to carry a toolbox as far as the Falklands. 8,000 miles I carried a toolbox, only to be met by a sparky with 2 screwdrivers in his top pocket. So I guess in retrospect, I picked a harder job than I needed to. Happy days in the training school, trying all the trades, going through all the skills, being taught by some of the cruelest tutors you could imagine, but I suppose it was to harden us up. As an aside, I'll share with you that we used to earn £3.13 a week as an apprentice, and our counterparts in other industries as labourers were getting 3 or 3.5 times as much as us. So £3.13 in 1966. Bear in mind that a Ben Sherman smart shirt cost £3, so you could only buy one of them a week. Getting back to Smith Docks, the outside fitters. All the trades came together to build ships. On and off new builds was the making of me. Working in the bowels of the ship on crankshafts, equipment, massive. When you stepped over a crankshaft, there was nothing either side except engine. So you had a long way to fall if you were to plunge down. But you didn't, of course. You just took it in your stride. One last department I want to mention, very important, was the millwrights department. Next to the machine shop. From this, we would repair everything in the shipyard. Climb cranes, stepping out from a ladder to the cab of a crane for the first time. A challenging and formative procedure, but we got the hang of it and we enjoyed it. In the millwrights, we learnt lots of skills. A great team of mechie fitters solving everything that needed solving in a shipyard. Lots of skilled men, lots of skills to be learned. A little story about working as an apprentice on a crane. One of the mechie fitters, he was called Leo. I'll leave it at that. Although I can remember his surname, but I better keep it quiet. I used to have his life with practical jokes, and he in turn used to beat me up. I never stopped having his life, drilling his cup and screwing it to a bench, or putting sellotape down the front edge of a cup so that when he picked it up it tipped in his lap, or tying his shoelaces together if he had a nap during the afternoon, or tying his overalls up so that it would get stuck when he was putting them on. Leo. As apprentices, we would carry the tool bag to the job. If that involved up a crane, then you would put the tool bag over your shoulder with the handle of the hammer under your chin and then climb the ladder. Where was health and safety? I don't know, but it certainly wasn't about in those days. On one particular crane job, scorching hot day, we'd finished the job and Leo was sunbathing somewhere, and I used this rag that was draped over the handrail to clean myself up, and then realised it was Leo's shirt. Oh, I had to do a runner, keep out the way. Other times I throw nuts and bolts in the river just for a laugh, and then had to go and source new ones because apparently we needed them for rebuilding stuff. Now cranes, would you believe the cabs of cranes were immaculate? I guess there was long periods of nothing to do, and so the crane operator would polish. So it glittered, the brass, the metal, and everything else, and you really felt obligated to wipe your feet before you went into the crane operator's house. Yes, it was a formative time, and I learnt a lot, and I'm forever grateful to Smith Docks for teaching me what it did. Smith Docks had a policy in the 70s where when you came out of your time at 20, or as in my case 20 and a half, you went out into the world and got yourself another job. And if you worked outside in industry for a year, Smith Docks would welcome you back with open arms. But every apprentice was encouraged to take another job and move out into the world. They helped you. Getting back to Peter Brown, the personnel officer, he would help you find 3 shipping companies and get your interviews with those. And many people did and enjoyed working in the Merchant Navy. That's a tale for another episode. Now, the springboard of Smith Docks took me abroad and offshore. But the skills I learnt at Smith Docks gave me a chance at all of these industries. Industrial robotics, flying ROVs offshore, commissioning pipelines, working on dive boats. That was the grounding that a mechanical fitter's apprenticeship at Smith Docks South Bank would give you. So I'm forever grateful. I'll wind this video up now. Thanks for watching. Join me again soon.